The engravings and paintings I have just been discussing fade away and vanish the moment you turn the next picture. The immortal works of Raphael, Correggio, and the whole school of Italy could not stand up to the comparison. So I always keep it until last, as the pièce de résistance, when I grant a few curious people the pleasure of traveling with me. And I can assure you that ever since I have been showing this sublime painting to connoisseurs and to the ignorant, to people in society, to workers, to women and children, and even to animals, I've always seen the spectators of whatever sort or condition show, each after his or her own manner, signs of pleasure and amazement, so faithfully is nature rendered on it. Ah, what picture could anyone present to you, gentlemen, and what spectacle could one place beneath your eyes, ladies, more sure of meeting with your approval than the faithful representation of yourselves? The painting of which I speak is a mirror, and nobody has ever yet taken it into their heads to criticize it. It is, for all those who look into it, a perfect picture, one with which it is impossible to find fault. Doubtless everyone will agree that it should be reckoned as one of the marvels of the country through which I am strolling. I will pass over in silence the pleasure felt by the physician meditating on the strange phenomenon of light that represents all the objects of nature on this polished surface. The mirror presents to the sedentary traveler 1,000 interesting reflections, 1,000 observations that make it a useful and precious object. You whom love has held or still holds in its thrall, learn that it is in front of a mirror that he sharpens his arrows and plots his cruelties. It is here that he practices his maneuvers, studies his moves, and prepares himself for the war he is about to declare. It's here that he trains himself to make those lingering glances, those little flirtatious expressions, those knowing pouts, just as an actor trains himself by gazing at his reflection before presenting himself to the public. Always impartial and true, a mirror restores to the spectator's eyes a vision of the roses of youth and the wrinkles of age, without denigrating or flattering anyone. It alone always tells the truth to the great, unlike all their other counselors. This advantage had led me to long for someone to invent a moral mirror in which all men could see themselves, with their vices and their virtues. I was even thinking of offering a prize so that some academy could encourage this invention, when mature reflection proved to me how useless it would be. Alas, it is so rare that ugliness recognizes itself and smashes the mirror. In vain do mirrors multiply around us and reflect light and truth with geometrical precision. Just as the rays are about to penetrate our eyes and depict us exactly as we are, self-regard slips its deceitful prism between ourselves and our image and presents us with a divinity. And of all the prisms that have ever existed, from the first which came from the hands of the immortal Newton, None has possessed a force of refraction as powerful or produced colors as agreeable and vivid as the prism of self-esteem. Now, since common mirrors announce the truth in vain, and in them everyone is happy with his face, since they cannot show men their physical imperfections, what would be the use of my moral mirror? Few people would look into it, and nobody would recognize himself or herself in it, apart from philosophers. I even rather doubt that they would. Taking the mirror for what it is, I hope that nobody will criticize me for having placed it above all the pictures of the school of Italy. The ladies who are incapable of bad taste and whose decision should settle everything usually glance first at this picture when they enter an apartment. I have seen these ladies and even certain young gallants forgetting their lovers or their mistresses at the ball, as well as the dancing and all the pleasures of the festivities, to contemplate with a notable self-indulgence this enchanting picture, and even honor it with a glance from time to time, in the middle of the most lively contradance. So who could dispute the rank I accorded among the masterpieces of the art of Apelles? I had finally come right up to my desk. Indeed, if I'd stretched out my arm, I would already have been able to touch the corner closest to me when I saw that I was about to destroy the fruit of all my labors and lose my life. I ought to pass over the accident that befell me so as to not discourage travelers, but it's so difficult to tip out of the post-chase I use that you will be forced to admit that someone needs to be thoroughly unlucky, as lucky as I am, to run such a danger. I found myself stretched out on the ground, completely toppled and overturned. And it all happened so quickly, so unexpectedly, that I would have been tempted to cast doubt on all my ill luck if a buzzing in my head and a violent pain in my left shoulder had not proved its authenticity all too clearly to me. It was yet another nasty trick played by my other half, startled by the voice of a poor man who suddenly started to beg for alms at my door, and by the barking of Rosine. My other half suddenly swung my chair around before my soul could have time to warn her that there wasn't a brick behind to support it. The move was so powerful and sudden that my post-chase found itself quite outside its center of gravity and fell back on top of me. This, I must confess, is one of the occasions on which I have had most cause to complain of my soul. Instead of being vexed at the absent-mindedness she had just demonstrated in telling off her companion for her over-precipitate movement, she forgot herself so far as to share the most animal resentment. I'm going to reread that. It got by me. This, I must confess, is one of the occasions on which I have had most cause to complain of my soul, instead of being vexed at the absent-mindedness she had just demonstrated in telling off her companion for her over-precipitate movement. She forget herself so far as to share the most animal resentment, and to maltreat that poor innocent man with harsh words. "You lazy so-and-so, go and do some work," she told him, an execrable way of talking to him, invented by avaricious and cruel wealth. "Sir," he said then to placate me, "I'm from Chambery. So much the worse for you. I'm Jacques. It was me that you saw in the countryside. I was the one leading the sheep to the fields. And what have you come here for?" My soul was starting to repent of the brutality of my first words. I even think that she had repented a moment before letting them slip out. It's like when you unexpectedly come to a ditch or a quagmire on your road. You can see it, but you don't have time to avoid it. Rosine finally brought me back to common sense, and repentant, she had recognized Jacques, who had often shared bread with her, and demonstrated her memory and gratitude with her affectionate pawings. All this time, Jonetti had been gathering the remains of my meal, which were destined to form his. He unhesitatingly gave them to Jacques. Poor Jonetti. Thus it is that on my journey I continually take lessons in philosophy and humanity from my servant and my dog. Before going any further, I want to put paid to a doubt which might have crossed my readers' minds. I wouldn't for anything in the world want to be suspected of having embarked on this journey merely because I couldn't think of anything to do, forced to do so, as it were, by mere circumstances. I assure you here, and swear by all that I hold dear, that I had planned to undertake it long before the event that made me lose my liberty for 42 days. This enforced retreat was merely an opportunity to set out on my journey earlier. I knew that the unnecessary protestation I am here uttering will seem suspect to certain people. But I also know that suspicious people won't read this book. They have enough to do already at home and at the homes of their friends. They have plenty of other things to keep them busy, and good people will believe me. I admit, however, that I'd have preferred to embark on this journey some other time, and that I'd have chosen Lent rather than Carnival to execute it. However, philosophical reflections granted me by heaven greatly helped me to put up with the privation of the pleasures that Turin presents in great numbers in these moments of noise and agitation. Quote, "It is beyond all doubt," end of quote, I kept saying to myself, quote, "that the walls of my room are not as magnificently decorated as those of a ballroom. The silence of my cabin isn't as good as the pleasant noise of music and dancing, but among the brilliant personages that you meet at those parties, there are certainly some who are more bored than I am." And why would I bother to consider those who are in a more agreeable situation when the world is swarming with people who are more unhappy than me? Instead of transporting myself in my imagination into that superb Caisson, where so many beauties are eclipsed by young Eugenie, if I wish to consider myself happy, I need only pause a while on the roads that lead there. A heap of unfortunate folk lying half naked under the porches of those sumptuous apartments, seem on the point of expiring from cold and misery. What a sight! I wish this page of my book could be known throughout the world. I would like it to be known that in this city, where everything breathes opulence, during the coldest winter nights, a host of wretches sleep out in the open, with only a boundary stone or the threshold of some palace on which to lay their heads. Here you see a group of children huddling close together so as not to die of cold. There it's a woman, shivering and voiceless to complain. The passers-by come and go, quite untouched by a sight to which they are used. The noise of the carriages, the voice of intemperance, the ravishing sounds of music sometimes mingle with the cries of these unfortunates and create a horrible dissonance. Anyone tempted to utter a hasty judgment on the city after reading the previous chapter would be quite mistaken. I mentioned the poor people you find there, their pitiful cries, and the indifference of certain people towards them, but I did not mention the host of charitable men who sleep while the others are enjoying themselves. Get up at daybreak and go off to give aid and comfort to misfortune without witnesses and without ostentation. No, I won't pass that over in silence. I want to write it on the back of the page that the whole world must read. Thus, having shared their fortune with their brothers, having poured balm into these hearts afflicted by pain, They go into the churches while exhausted vice sleeps on an eider down, and there they offer their prayers to God and thank Him for His benefits. The light of the solitary lamp in the temple is still struggling against that of the dawning day, and already they are prostrating themselves at the foot of the altars. And the Eternal, angered at the harshness and avarice of men, holds back His thunderbolt that is ready to strike. I wanted to say something about these unfortunate people during my journey, since the idea of their misery has often come along to distract me en route. Sometimes struck by the difference between their situation and mine, I would suddenly halt my Berlin, and my room would seem to me prodigiously embellished. What useless luxury! 6 chairs, 2 tables, a desk, a mirror, what ostentation! My bed in particular, my pink and white bed and my 2 mattresses, seemed to me to rival the magnificence and the soft ease of the monarchs of Asia. These reflections rendered the pleasures that I had been forbidden indifferent to me, and as I went from one reflection to the next, my sudden philosophical frame of mind became so marked that I could have seen a ball in the room next door. And heard the sound of violins and clarinets without shifting from my place. I would have heard with my own 2 ears the melodious voice of Marchesini, that voice which has so often made me ecstatic. Yes, I would have heard it without feeling at all stirred. Even more, I would have looked on the most beautiful woman in Turin without the slightest emotion. Eugenia herself, elegantly dressed from head to toe by the hands of Mademoiselle Rappas. Actually, I'm not sure of that. But allow me to ask you, gentlemen, do you still enjoy yourselves as much as you used to at the ball and the theater? For my part, I confess, for some time now, all crowded gatherings have inspired me with a certain terror. In them, I am assailed by a sinister dream. In vain, I do all I can to drive it away, but it keeps coming back like the dream in Athalie. This is perhaps because the soul, today flooded with dark ideas and tragic images, finds causes of sadness everywhere. Just as a corrupted stomach converts the healthiest foods into poisons. Anyway, here is my dream. When I'm at one of those parties amidst that host of amiable and friendly men dancing and singing and shedding tears at the tragedies and expressing nothing but joy, frankness, and cordiality, I tell myself, quote, if in this polite assembly there suddenly entered a white bear, a philosopher, a tiger, or some other animal of that sort, which climbed into the orchestra, crying in a crazed voice, wretched humans, listen to the truth that speaks to you through my mouth. You are oppressed and tyrannized. You are unhappy. You are bored. Shake off this lethargy. You musicians, start by smashing those instruments over your heads. Let everyone arm himself with a dagger. Leave aside all thoughts of relaxation and party-going. Climb up into the boxes and slaughter everyone. Let women, too, dip their timid hands in blood. Leave, you are free. Tear down your king from his throne and your God from his sanctuary. Well, I say to myself, how many of these charming men would obey the tiger? How many perhaps were thinking of doing so even before he came in? Who knows? Weren't they dancing in Paris 5 years ago? Jonetti, close the doors and the windows. I don't want to see the light anymore. Let no man enter my room. Place my saber within reach of my hand. You leave too, and appear no more before me. No, stay, Jonetti, stay, poor boy, and you too, my Rosine. You who guess at my pains and assuage them with your friendly pawings. Come, my Rosine. Come. V, consonant, and stop. The fall of my post-chase has done the reader the service of shortening my journey by a good dozen or so chapters, since as I picked myself up again, I found myself opposite and right in front of my desk, and there was no longer time to make any reflections on the number of engravings and pictures that I still had to get through, which might have lengthened my little excursion on painting. So leaving on the right portraits of Raphael and his mistress, the Chevalier d'Assas and the Shepherdess of the Alps, and making our way along the left, on the window side, we come to my window. This is the first and most apparent object that presents itself to the traveler's gaze if you follow the route I have just indicated. It is topped by a few notebooks serving as a library. The whole thing is crowned by a bust at the peak of the pyramid, and this is the object that contributes the most to the embellishment of the landscape. Pulling open the first drawer on the right, you find a writing case, paper of every kind, pens already sharpened, and sealing wax. All this would fill the most indolent man with the itch to write. I am sure, my dear Jenny, that if you were by chance to open this drawer, you would reply to the letter that I wrote you last year. In the corresponding drawer lie, in a disordered pile, materials for the interesting story of The Prisoner of Pignerol, which you will soon be reading, my friends. Between these two drawers is a recess into which I pop letters as soon as I receive them. Here you can find all those that I have received over the last 2 years. Over the last 10 years. The oldest ones are arranged by date in several packets. The new ones are put there any old how. I have kept several of them dating back to my earliest youth. What a pleasure it is to see in these letters the interesting situations of our young years, and to be transported back again to those happy times that we will never see again. What's up, dude? My heart is full. What an intense, melancholy pleasure it feels when my eyes run over the lines traced by someone who is no longer alive. Here is his handwriting. It was his heart that guided his hand, and this letter is all I have left of him. When I put my hand into this cubbyhole, I rarely emerge from it for the rest of the day. Thus it is that the traveler rapidly traverses several provinces of Italy, making a few hasty and superficial observations before settling in Rome for months at a time. This is the richest vein of the mind that I am quarrying. What a change in my ideas and my feelings. What a difference in my friends. When I compare them as they were and as they are today, I see them in a mortal frenzy, busied with plans that touch them now no more. We regarded a particular event as a great misfortune, but the end of the letter is missing and the event is completely forgotten. I cannot know what it was all about. 1,000 prejudices besieged us. The world and the people in it were quite unknown to us, but also what warmth in our dealings. What an intimate bond. What boundless trust. We were happy in our errors, and now, it's so different. We have had to read, like everyone else, in the human heart, and truth, falling in our midst like a cannon shell, has destroyed forever the enchanted palace of illusion. I could perfectly well, if I so pleased, write a chapter on this dried... I could perfectly well, if I so pleased, write a chapter on this dried rose here, if the subject were worth the trouble. It's a carnival flower from last year. I myself went to pluck it from the greenhouses of the Valentino, and in the evening, 1 hour before the ball, full of hope and in a state of agreeable turmoil, I went to present it to Madame de Hotcastle. She took it and placed it on her dressing table without looking at it and without looking at me either. But how could she have paid any attention to me? She was busy looking at herself. Standing in front of a great mirror with her hair dressed, she was putting the finishing touches to her finery. She was so very preoccupied, her attention was so totally absorbed by ribbons, gauze, and pompons of every kind laid in a heap in front of her, that I did not get a single glance, not one sign from her. I resigned myself. I humbly held her pins ready for her, all arranged in my hand, but as her lace-maker's pillow was more within her reach, she would take them from the pillow, and if I held out my hand, she would take them from my hand. It made no difference. And in order to take them, she would simply feel for them without taking her eyes away from her mirror, for fear that she might lose sight of herself. For a moment I held a second mirror behind her so she could better judge how she looked, and as her face was repeated from one mirror to the other, I then saw how a whole row of coquettish women, none of whom paid me any attention. I then saw a whole row of coquettish women, none of whom paid me any attention. All in all, dare I admit it, we made a really sad picture, my Rose and I. I finally lost patience, and no longer able to resist the resentment that was devouring me, I set down the mirror I was holding and swept out in high dudgeon without saying goodbye. "You're going?" she said to me, turning this way so as to see her figure in profile. I didn't answer, but I listened for a while at the door to see the effect that my sudden exit would produce. "Don't you see," she said to her chambermaid after a moment's silence, "that this camisole is much too wide for my figure, especially at the bottom, and that we need to make a pannier for it with pins?" How and why this dried rose finds itself here on a notebook on my desk is something I am certainly not going to say, since I have already declared that a dry rose didn't deserve a whole chapter. Note well, ladies, that I'm not making any reflection on the adventure of the dried rose. I am not saying that Madame de Hotcastle was right or wrong in preferring her toilette to me, nor that I had any right to be received in any other fashion. I will refrain even more deliberately from deducing from this any general consequences on the reality, strength, and durability of the affection of ladies for their men friends. I will content myself with sending this chapter, since chapter it is, out into the world with the rest of the journey without addressing it to anyone and without recommending it to anyone. I will merely add one piece of advice for you gentlemen. Just get it firmly into your heads that on the day of a ball, your mistress no longer belongs to you. When she starts to dress, a lover is no longer any more important than a husband, and the ball alone becomes the lover. Everyone knows, too, what a lover gains by forcibly trying to ensure that he is loved. So bear your afflictions with patience and laughter. And don't have any illusions, sir. If they take pleasure in seeing you at the ball, it's not in your capacity as a lover. It's because you are part of the ball and are thus, in consequence, a fraction of her new conquest. You are a decimal point of a lover. Or perhaps it's because you dance well and will make her shine. Finally, the most flattering thing about the welcome she gives you is probably that she hopes, by declaring that a man of merit such as yourself as her lover, she will arouse the jealousy of her female friends. If it weren't for this consideration, she wouldn't even look at you. So that's all clear. You will have to resign yourself and wait until your role as husband is finished. I know more than one man who wishes he could get off as lightly. I promised a dialogue between my soul and the other, but there are certain chapters that slip away from me, or rather there are others which flow from my pen, as if in spite of myself, and put all my plans out. They include the chapter on my library, which I will make as short as possible. The 42 days are coming to an end, and an equal space of time would not suffice to finish the description of the rich land through which I am so agreeably traveling. So my library is composed of novels, since I have to admit it. Yes, novels, and a few choice poets. As if my own troubles weren't enough, I also voluntarily share those of 1,000 imaginary characters, and I feel them as vividly as my own. How many tears I have shed for that unhappy Clarissa, and for the lover of Charlotte. But if I also seek out feigned afflictions, I find conversely in this imaginary world the virtue, the goodness, the selflessness that I have never yet found combined in the real world in which I live. In it I find a woman of the kind I yearn for, never in a bad mood, never flighty or flirtatious, never evasive. I won't even mention beauty. You can rely on my imagination. I make her so beautiful that there's no cause whatever for complaint. Then, closing the book, which no longer corresponds to my ideas, I take her by the hand, and we wander together through a landscape 1,000 times more delightful than that of Eden. What painter could depict the enchanted landscape into which I've placed the divinity of my heart, and what poet could ever describe the vivid and varied sensations that I experience in these enchanted regions? How often have I cursed that Cleveland who at every moment is embarking on new misfortunes that he could avoid? I cannot stand that book and that long chain of calamities, but if I open it to pass the time, I have to devour it right through to the end. How could anyone leave that poor man among the Abaquis? What would become of him among those savages? I dare even less to abandon him in the excursion he undertakes to break out of his captivity. Finally, I share his pain so intimately, I take such a strong interest in him and his unfortunate family, that the appearance of the fierce Ruentons makes my hair stand on end. A cold sweat breaks out all over me when I read this passage, and my alarm is just as intense and real as if I myself were to be roasted and eaten by those villains. When I have wept and made love enough, I seek out some other poet, and I again set out for another world.